Everyone in the small town of Port Haven, Washington thought Claire and Nathan were just friends, the kind you grow up with, like an extra sibling or a neighbor who becomes part of your everyday. They met in second grade, shared ice cream in the summers, slow danced as prom dates because no one else asked, and laughed together in a way that made people believe they had the kind of friendship that would last forever. But what no one saw was how Claire looked at him when he wasn't watching, a soft, almost aching gaze that lingered too long. And what no one knew was that Nathan had memorized the way she brushed her hair behind her ear when she got nervous. Or how her voice got quiet when she was hurt. For years, they hid it, the longing, the attraction, the quiet ache of wanting more, but being afraid to lose the little they had. They had a ritual. Most evenings were spent at Maggie's Diner. The old 1950s place with vinyl booths and fairy lights that never came down. Claire always ordered the same chocolate milkshake, and Nathan teased her for it every time, even though he found comfort in the routine. They'd sit for hours, legs brushing under the table, laughing about old memories, pretending their hands didn't want to reach for each other. It was innocent on the surface. But beneath it, beneath every smile and shared glance, there was something far more complicated. There were moments that felt like almost kisses, words that hung too long in the air, and pauses that felt heavier than silence. Claire had never been with anyone who made her feel the way Nathan did, safe and alive all at once. But she'd dated, of course. A few men in college. One who broke her heart. But no one ever stayed long, maybe because none of them were him. Nathan, on the other hand, dated like someone going through the motions, polite, kind, and distant. Claire noticed how none of the girls lasted more than a few weeks. One of them even told her, "He's sweet, but he's clearly in love with someone else. I just don't think he knows it yet." And maybe that was true. Maybe they were both just too afraid to say it out loud. What if it ruined everything? What if the risk wasn't worth it? What if the dream of something more was better than the heartbreak of a reality where they tried and failed? One night, as the leaves began to fall and the air turned crisp, they sat at their usual booth, the golden glow from the diner's lights making everything feel softer, more delicate. Claire stirred her milkshake slowly and asked, almost too casually, "What would you do if I left town?" Nathan blinked, caught off guard. "Where would you go?" "I don't know. Somewhere new. Somewhere quiet." He hesitated. Looked at her. Really looked at her. But said nothing more than, "You'd like that." She nodded and smiled, but something behind her eyes flickered, something sad and quietly defeated. He didn't ask her to stay, and in that moment, the silence between them said everything. She finished her drink. He paid the bill. They walked out like they always did, shoulder to shoulder, close enough to touch but never crossing the line. But that night, when she lay in bed, Claire realized something had broken. Not loudly. Not with anger. But quietly, like something delicate giving way after being held too tightly for too long. She had always thought there would be more time, but maybe love, the kind that sneaks up on you through years of friendship, only waits so long, and maybe, just maybe, she wasn't going to wait anymore. When Claire left Port Haven and moved to Oregon, it wasn't a dramatic goodbye. No tears, no confessions. Just a tight, lingering hug outside Maggie's Diner and a half-hearted promise to stay in touch. Nathan stood in her driveway that morning, hands in his pockets, trying to smile like it didn't hurt. But inside, something felt hollow, like a door had closed, and he hadn't been brave enough to walk through it. He told himself she needed this, a new start, a new city. He told himself he'd call her tomorrow. But the days passed, and the silence between them grew longer than either of them expected. What no one saw was how often he drove past her old street, how many times he pulled out his phone to text her, only to lock the screen again. And what no one knew was that Claire, now living in a small apartment in Eugene, began writing him letters, not emails. Not texts. Real letters. Ink on paper. At first, they were light, updates about her new job at a local bookstore, the quiet charm of her neighborhood, the way the rain sounded different in Oregon. But soon, the words changed. She began pouring pieces of her heart into them, memories she couldn't let go of, things she wished she had said. I loved you, one letter read, and I think I still do. Another said, I waited for you to stop me. To tell me not to go. But you didn't. These weren't letters she ever planned to send. She folded them carefully and tucked them into a shoebox under her bed, one for each night she couldn't sleep without thinking of him. Meanwhile, back in Port Haven, Nathan was learning how to live with the space she left behind. He started working longer hours at the auto shop. Staying busy, staying numb. He still went to Maggie's diner, but now he sat alone, stirring his coffee instead of laughing over milkshakes. The waitress, Linda, who'd watched them grow up in that booth, finally said to him one night, she was the light in your eyes. You know. You look dimmer now. He gave her a tired smile, but said nothing. He didn't know how to explain that Claire had always been more than just a friend, she was a part of him. But he'd let fear hold his tongue when it mattered. Claire tried dating again, but nothing stuck. Everyone felt temporary. No one else made her laugh the way Nathan did. No one else made her feel like home. Her friends encouraged her to move on, but how do you move on from someone who never really left your heart? One night, she sat on the floor of her bedroom, surrounded by the letters she never sent, reading them back to herself like pages from a life she never lived. That's when she realized something painful but true. She had written to him, but never given him the chance to write back. Nathan, on his end, had begun talking to Claire in his head more than anyone else. When something good happened, he'd imagine telling her. When he felt lost, he'd wonder what advice she'd give. And every time he saw a woman with brown hair and soft eyes, he looked twice, hoping it might be her. They were still connected, somehow, by invisible threads of memory, of hope. Of unspoken words that hung between the pages of those unsent letters, and the nights he lay awake staring at the ceiling, wishing he'd been braver. What they didn't know was that the love they never admitted was still alive, quiet, patient, and waiting, and neither of them could shake the feeling that their story wasn't finished. Not yet. 2 years later, Claire came back to Port Haven, not for love, not for closure, but for something simple, her father's 60th birthday. She told herself it would just be a weekend, a quick visit, nothing more. She didn't tell many people she was coming home. Definitely not Nathan. She didn't know what she'd say to him if she saw him, or how she'd act around him after all that time apart. But fate, as it often does, didn't wait for the perfect moment. It found its own. That Sunday morning, as the sun broke through the clouds over Main Street and the town yawned awake, Claire walked past Maggie's diner, their old spot, and she heard someone call her name. She turned slowly, heart suddenly heavy and wild in her chest. And there he was. Nathan. Standing on the steps of the diner, holding a coffee cup, eyes wide in disbelief, like he wasn't sure if she was real or just a memory that finally showed up in daylight. For a second, neither of them spoke. They just looked at each other, changed, older, but still familiar in the ways that mattered. She gave him a soft smile, and he said her name again, like it meant something sacred. They ended up inside the diner without planning to, sitting at their old booth, the red leather still worn, the jukebox still humming in the background. It felt like no time had passed, and yet, everything had. They caught up on the surface level things first, work, where they lived now, mutual friends, how the town hadn't changed. But there was tension between them, not angry, but aching. Claire noticed how Nathan looked at her like he was trying to remember everything about her face, every detail time might have softened. And Nathan couldn't ignore how her laugh made him feel, like home, like something he'd been missing in a quiet part of his life for far too long. After their coffee, Claire reached into her bag with hands that weren't quite steady and pulled out something she'd carried with her for too long, one of the letters. Folded, a little worn at the edges. She slid it across the table toward him. "I wrote this years ago," she said quietly, "but I never sent it. I don't even know why I brought it, but I want you to read it." Nathan took it slowly, his fingers brushing hers just for a second that said more than most conversations do. He opened it, and as his eyes moved across her words, his expression softened, then changed. His mouth parted slightly, his brow furrowed, and by the end, he looked up at her like something inside him had broken open. "You loved me?" he asked, barely louder than a whisper. Claire's eyes filled, but she didn't look away. "I think I always did." He stared at her, and for a moment, the air around them held every memory they never spoke about: late nights, gentle touches that almost meant something, long silences that said more than words ever could. And then Nathan said the one thing she never expected. "I think I've been in love with you since we were kids. I didn't know how to say it without losing you." There was no dramatic music, no movie moment. Just two people, finally brave, in the middle of a quiet town that had always known them as just friends. But now, something had changed. They walked outside together. The wind was soft, the sky a shade of gold only seen in early spring. Their hands brushed again, this time on purpose, and they didn't pull away. After years of silence, of pretending, of being just friends, the truth was finally out. And it felt like something they'd both waited a lifetime to say. The story between them wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. That evening, Claire and Nathan walked by the lake just outside town, the same path they used to wander in high school, back when love was still a quiet thing they didn't know how to name. The sky was painted in soft oranges and pinks, and the air held that coolness only early spring brings, the kind that brushes against your skin and makes you feel alive. They didn't say much at first. Just walked, side by side, letting the silence fill in the spaces between the past and the present. But the weight of everything they'd finally said was still in the air, gently pressing on both of them. Claire could feel her heart pounding, not in fear, but in recognition. She had waited years to be beside him like this, not as his friend, not as a memory, but as something more. Nathan, hands deep in his jacket pockets, looked over at her every few minutes like he couldn't believe she was real, like he was still catching up to the moment. Then he stopped, right at the edge of the water where the light danced across the surface. Claire turned toward him, and their eyes met. No walls, no pretending, no hiding. Just two people finally stripped down to their truth. "I was so scared," he said, voice quiet but steady. "Scared that if I told you how I felt, I'd lose you. I thought it would be better to keep you close as a friend than risk you walking away." Claire let out a soft, sad laugh, her voice catching in her throat. "I was scared too," she whispered. "I kept waiting for you to be sure, to say something first, but you never did, and I didn't know how to wait without falling apart." Nathan stepped closer, his hands finally reaching for hers, holding them like they were something fragile but familiar. "You were never just my friend," he said. "You were my person. The only one I could really talk to, really be myself with. I loved you quietly for so long it started to hurt." Claire felt a tear slide down her cheek, not from pain, but from release, like something heavy she'd carried for years had finally been set down. "Why do we do that?" she asked softly. "Why do we let fear stop us from the one thing we want most?" He didn't have an answer. But he stepped forward again and brushed a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch so gentle it made her heart ache. "I don't want to be afraid anymore," he said. "Not with you." And then, finally, their lips met, slow, deep, full of everything they'd held back for too long. It wasn't a kiss of fireworks or drama. It was a kiss of homecoming, of recognition, of hearts saying, "There you are. I've been looking for you." Everyone had thought Claire and Nathan were just friends, the kind of friends who grew up together and stayed close through time. But what no one saw was the love that had been quietly growing beneath every conversation, every shared glance, every goodbye that never really meant goodbye. The truth was, they had always belonged to each other, even before they knew what that meant. Now, finally, with nothing left to hide, they walked back through the quiet town, hand in hand, heart to heart, knowing that what they had wasn't just friendship, or even a slow-burning romance, that it was something deeper, stronger, the kind of love that doesn't fade with time. The kind of love that waits, patiently, painfully, until both hearts are ready, and now, at last, they were.